Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Questioning a better way, one gracefully disruptive conversation at a time.
Welcome to Turmeric and Tequila. I'm so excited to be with you here today. We have some Colorado family in the house. Connect or Connect. If you listen to Turmeric and Tequila, you know these are my favorite ones. So we have a special shout out to the Laura. She is the founder of Lux Neuro and our title sponsor. She introduced me to the Christopher Peck. So we're going to do this introduction. But before we do, let's give Laura some love. Lux Neuro is offering neurofeedback and counseling where your heart and mind align. For more information about what neurofeedback can do for you, listen to the neurofeedback stories of transformation in the middle of this podcast. Neurofeedback effectively treats everything from insomnia, anxiety, depression, trauma, ADHD, and much more. Optimize your brain. Check them out. And shout out to Declan James Watches. They are fitness family and it is veteran owned, former Navy SEAL. I train with Brian, the founder, at Palladium CrossFit. So go check out what they've going. Beautiful watches, all supporters of our show. Without further ado, Christopher, welcome to Turmeric and Tequila.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, absolutely. We are going to talk about public speaking. This has come up in my world a ton. I even sent Chris a paid opportunity that I have that I got to speak at and talk about empowerment, particularly to a group of women in the steel industry. So it was a really unique opportunity. And I had Chris pick it apart. So we're going to pick apart some of my speaking abilities or lack thereof and help the world. But a quick 411 on Christopher. He is helping extraordinary people become extraordinary speakers. He does public speaking and interpersonal communication coaching. He is the founder of Speak Into Action, and he has recently launched a book, Active Communication, How to Command Any Audience in Your Business and in Your Life. So Chris, welcome to TNT.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about public speaking because everybody's afraid of it and nobody talks about it. So let's do this.
Yes. And there's some statistic you probably know is better than me, but people fear public speaking more than they fear dying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite Jerry Seinfeld quotes, like where he talks about like more of us would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy, which is like an incredible thought. If you take a step back and really think about it, it's like, really? Like that's where we're at in terms of our relationship to public speaking. And yeah, it is.
That is so wild. Well, okay, so if you listen to TNT, you know, we want to talk about the agenda and the mission and what you have going on. But before that, let's talk about the human behind the mission. Tell us about young Christopher, kind of how you got here. You have a really cool story, but give us the young version of yourself.
Yeah, this story always starts out when I was 10. And like, I know that there's more that influenced it before then. But when I was 10 years old, I competed in the school-wide spelling bee. And Kristen, I humiliated myself in front of the entire school. So if you don't know how a spelling bee works, the very first round is like a practice round. The judges are giving everybody kind of a gimme word. It's an opportunity to build some confidence, to figure out how the spelling bee is going to work. I misspelled my practice word, which was job. Like I spelled it G-O-B, and then I doubled down on it. I mean, it was embarrassing. The whole school laughed. It was one of those mortifying experiences. And in my time working with public speakers and working with communicators, it's usually a moment like this that sort of defines a person as that's not a thing that I want in my life. I don't want that kind of vulnerability. I don't want that kind of visibility. I'm mortified of doing something like this again. I made a very different choice. Later that year, I was the master of ceremonies for the school play. I went on to do theater in high school, in college. I had a prolific professional career. I have a master's degree from Baylor University in stage direction. And so I made a very different decision. I said this thing that I cowered behind, that mortified me, I want to double down and I want to figure it out and I want to get really, really good at it. Which brought me to, in the early 2010s, I taught at the University of South Alabama, and I started meeting students who were taking the university's public speaking course. And I started learning how this public speaking course was being done almost exclusively online. The only opportunities that these students had to share their ideas in front of their fellow peers was when they came together as a class. And I'm thinking, why don't theater teachers teach public speaking? Why don't stage directors? Why don't actors? Why don't individuals who have committed their entire life to communicating stories effectively, why aren't we entrusted to share this information? And so that was what brought me to my consultancy and my coaching is, how about as a stage director and as someone who has acted professionally and told stories professionally, why don't I put myself in a position where I can help business leaders and public speakers effectively share their ideas on stages, accommodating any size audience.
There you go. So as a young person, were you like in front of people, or was there any sort of like stage theater as like a very young kiddo?
It's interesting because I was both painfully shy and, I noticed, family dynamic often has a lot to do with the way that we communicate and the way that we show up. And I did notice that growing up, like when I took on a more performative self, like I got really positive feedback from my internal family group. And so like performing for my family was something that brought me attention. It brought me command. It brought me a voice. And so there was something that I was exploring from a really early age, but balancing that with, I was painfully shy. I didn't like to assert my voice. I felt really uncomfortable in new groups. We moved around a lot. My dad was in the military. And so, like most individuals, it's complicated. But the part of my story that I do like to really hit home is I'm not one of those individuals that was born to be a public speaker. Like under different circumstances and a different path, I probably would have been one of those keyboard warriors who felt a lot more comfortable behind the scenes. But for whatever reason, there was something empowering about having my voice heard. And I wanted to lean into that. And I wanted to explore that. And I wanted to get really good at it. And then as a stage director, I liked helping other people get really good at it.
There you go. I always say it's written in the stars early, and sometimes it's that breakdown, that breakthrough that's like that turns the light onto the path of what we're going to do next.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more that in 2024, almost 2025, it's really critical that we are using our voices. And the podcast, quite literally, what's so wonderful about podcasting in general is that you can have this 30 minutes to an hour plus or whatever long conversation of using your voice, sharing your journey, your experience, and your intel with other people to help all of our processes. But before that, the hard part is knowing that your story is worthy, that there's value to it, and then actually using your voice to like step on that mic and share. What about communication or even executing a message through theatrical performance? Why is this so important to you?
It's interesting. I've been exploring that today as I've been preparing for another interview. But when I came out of the theater world, I thought this job was going to be really easy because everyone in the theater community understands that their voice is their most important tool, right? That the ability to tell stories, that the ability to craft themselves intentionally, to communicate a strong intention is what's going to keep food on the table. It's what keeps a show going. It's what keeps an actor employed. It's what ensures that a stage director, is selected, because of the strong body of work that they've done before them. And so I assumed going into the business world that it would be similar, and it's really not. I've run into a lot of assumptions that communication is something that you're either born with or you're not. That that we could all stand to be better communicators, but those individuals who feel that it's a fixed skill and so they're skeptical of the ability to improve, or they just find themselves lucky enough to be one who is comfortable in front of an audience, and so it automatically gives them a leg up, and so why get better? And so that's really kind of doubled down my efforts. Is I came into this knowing that people can be better communicators, that they should be better communicators, that the stories that are so important to us deserve to be heard in a really impactful and empowering way. And so really doubling down on then let's get there. Like, let's get beyond the superficial, well, I'm the guy on the team, or I'm the individual on the team who feels comfortable getting in front of an audience, so I'll do it. Let's get you from there to that place where you're mobilizing audiences, where you're motivating clientele, where you're using the language of your story to empower other people. And, you know, whether it's make the world a better place or like create more exposure for your business, whatever the case may be, that you can level up and get to that place.
I love it. I agree with all those things. And I would say, you know, at Turmeric and Tequila, we talk a lot about community and mental health. And if you have a platform or a space, quite literally why I started this podcast was to hold space for people to share their stories and use their voice, even when they didn't want to, because I was doing influencer marketing. So all my influencers were down with it. But all the people that I really wanted to be influencers that didn't want to, I had to literally drag them on the mic and almost make them use their voice. But the point is when you feel seen and you feel heard and you can then connect with people, that is mental health. That is saving lives. Like, it can go so much farther than, you know, just inspiring someone to do something small. It could be, you know, dramatically said about life and death and just connecting with people. And in this day and age, we need that more than ever. So I really feel like you are on the front lines of connecting like-minded humans and facilitating conversations, but mostly like empowering people to step on the mic and share their journey. And through that, you never know where the message is going to land on the right person, and that can change everything for them. So this is really, really important stuff. And what's cool is even our young people, we've got this digital age and social media. More and more people want to be in person and have that communication skill. And we are disconnected because of our phone. So I feel like this is not only a skill to be like public speaking in front of an audience, but public speaking peer to peer, or just being in public and speaking. So like literally watering it down and understanding how to connect with other people. So let's jump in. Why don't we'll to pick apart my speech and talk about things that I can do better, but I want you to talk about your mission and the book first, because I think that might be a good starting point for people if they're not ready to do coaching or lessons or anything. Why don't you share with us like why you're inspired to write the book and what it's really about?
No, absolutely. So the book itself was written over about a year and a half. It's actually a series of social media posts that I did starting in about September of 2022. My mother-in-law, of all people, has been keeping up with them avidly and looked at me one day and was like, why don't you just turn these into a book? And I said, okay. I mean, like Path of Least Resistance, it's already written. I found a great editor. I found a great graphic designer. And what it is coalesced into is a really simple pocket guide to stronger public speaking and interpersonal communication. It aligns a lot with the intention behind our communication, making sure that we are intentional in the way that we show up, that we're curious, that we're interested in others. And then a lot of it is supported by the theatrical skills and techniques that I've grown up learning that have helped empower me as a communicator. So everything from the shoes that we wear, like when we show up in different spaces. You know, one of the things, as you can imagine in theater, right, costumes come last because they take so much time. So dress rehearsal is traditional at the end of a rehearsal period. But it is not uncommon for performers to have a pair of rehearsal shoes from day one, because shoes change the way that we show up, the way that we stand, our silhouette, the way we feel about ourselves. And so what are some of these tools and techniques that I've taken for granted for most of my life, because it's been such an integral part of my training, and can hand those off to individuals who are honestly just looking for a place to start at the end of 2024, the beginning of 2025. They want something to change in their communication. They're not even entirely certain what it is, or maybe they are. I'm offering, a simple guide with theater at kind of the core of everything, theater and performance and showing up performatively to help your communication as a public speaker, as an interpersonal communicator. I'm super excited for the book to come out. November the 17th is the date. Active communication with a play on words, that act part of active, because I don't want people to think that I'm shying away from the performative qualities of communication, because I'm absolutely not. Communication is a performance. We can affect the impact that we have on our audiences through the performative choices that we make and the way that we share our ideas. And so just getting people to take that leap of faith to understand how theater can connect directly to their communication effectively, that's what this book is all about.
I love it. I think I had the opportunity to read it, and I think it's great that you did social media posts as the story, because you're meeting the humans where they're at, and likely your younger audience. And because I still think people have to bridge the gap between I'm not a public speaker, I don't need this, and
Yep.
this is about communication. Everybody needs this, because you can then be seen and heard and understood. I think one of the best podcast questions that I ever got is where do you feel most understood? And I was like, everywhere, all the time. Like, I'm living outside the box, even as a privileged white blonde female from the burbs. I don't stick out that much unless I'm in neon, which I usually feel more comfortable that way. But the thing is, you feel misunderstood all the time. So this practice and understanding of how important communication is, public speaker or not, you are speaking in public all the time. So this I think the book is a great intro into why this is so important. And then you can dig deep and be like, okay, I get it, Chris. Thank you. Now let's get into the details. And I want to clear up one piece, or just have an open conversation and commentary around the idea of performative. Because I think when people hear performative, they think inauthentic, where it's not about that. You're still authentic, but you're stepping into your role of, in my view, as an athlete at competition time. Like, I have a pre-game ritual. I have a ceremony before I get on the field. I do all these things, like you notated about public speaking. I was like, oh, as an athlete, I do all this. This isn't, it's performative, but it's all authentic. So why don't you unpack that a little bit, just so there's clarity in those performative versus being authentic, or how they coincide?
No, I'm so glad you asked that question. And I won't dip my toe into the authenticity thing because I have some pretty extreme views. But what I will say is, to the person who's skeptical of the word performance, don't confuse performance with pretending, right? To perform is simply to perform an action. A performer on stage performs an action, right? It might be they are performing the action of a person who is on their deathbed and trying to resolve conflict with their family before they pass, or they are performing a high stakes. They want to end up with the love of their life, right? But they are performing actions in order to gain something, which is what we're always doing all the time when we communicate. Right now, you and I are performing for one another. It doesn't mean we're showing up disingenuously. It just means that there's something that we want from this conversation. There's something that we're trying to, there's some sort of impact that we're trying to create for our audience. And so we're going to perform different actions. We're going to play with language. We're going to play with the way we tell stories. We're going to highlight certain pieces of information in order to craft that experience, that intentional experience that we want for our audience. So I think it's really important just to dismiss the idea that performing is pretending, because it's not.
Right. As soon as I was understanding it further, I'm like, I show up to perform and compete as an athlete. I perform, an offensive play to score a goal to win the game. So that really turned on the light for me as an athlete. And we are absolutely performing. We wear different hats during the day, and it's never about fake or pretending. It's about filling that role and meeting towards that goal. So I think that clarity in this conversation is a really key piece. But dude, you already poked the bear. I got to know now, what is your hot take on authenticity? Let you hit us with it.
Okay, so there is a movement of psychology, and I would consider it an entire movement at this point, because I think the authenticity movement itself has gotten big enough. I think it's something like 25,000 books have been written about authenticity. It's nuts. Like, people are so insane about authenticity right now.
It's monetizable, so.
It is. So there's a movement of authenticity that defines authenticity not as something you are or are not, but simply as the accumulating of experiences and relationships and circumstances and experiences that you've had to date, right? So from that perspective, every person that you've met, every conversation that you've had, every relationship, either positive or negative, has brought you to this place in this time, and the way that you show up and the way that you present for people. And so from that perspective, there is no inauthentic you. There is, in fact, we are always our most authentic. We're never more authentic than the moment that we are in, because the moment that we are in is an accumulation of every experience that has brought us to a place where we feel like either the way to protect ourselves, or the way to cast the most influence, or the way to gather what we want, Like, we have to show up this specific way based on the experiences that have informed that.
Boom. You know what your next book is?
I would love to, and yes. Yes. I mean, yes. I would dearly love to, like, just to get that, like, just to see how many haters come at me.
Don't even put that in the universe. I don't think so. As a marketing branding professional in the health and wellness world, our title sponsor is Neurofeedback Brain Health. I'm here for authenticity, though. I mean, another motive for this podcast was getting real people doing real things, because I was working with, humans that had eating disorders that were on the cover of Health magazine. I'm like, okay, I can't not tell the truth. And even in my moment of being authentic, that was a lie in my mind. Like, that was what it was. So I actually think there's a whole wealth of humans that are dying to hear that and understand that immediately. I don't even think it's that in-depth of a conversation, or you're poking the bear that hard, because our young humans are so privy to the conversation, like, they know all this stuff. So I actually think your 18 to 25s would understand that immediately. I think the older groups, where we are still talking about authenticity, we're maybe not on social media as much, it might be different. Anyways, this is just my thoughts, but I think that's a really important conversation. And I think it really does run parallel to this conversation of public speaking and knowing who you are, because you can't really do anything. You can't step on the field or on the stage until you want to be there and you have something to say or do. So if you can understand your own authenticity, however that's packaged, I think that's a step one.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, I think there's so much fear and insecurity that sometimes we can use authenticity to hold us back, right? Or the appearance of authenticity. Oh, I'm just not the kind of person who gets on stage and shares my voice. Okay. Like, I hear that. And like, how can you show up in smaller spaces, or how can you show up in different spaces? Are you telling me that your authenticity is going to keep you from sharing your voice, like, entirely? Because that doesn't feel like authenticity. I mean, it is authentic to be afraid, but it feels like you're hiding behind, like, what happens to be like a really sexy term in business and in personal life right now, in order to, like, grow in the areas that you really want to. I don't know. That's what I hear when I hear people say, oh, I'm just not a public speaker, or I'm just not very good on the phone, or I'm just not this, or I'm not that. I'm like, okay, like, maybe it's a skill you haven't developed, but do you want to? Like, is that an area where you want to show up? Like, think about that.
Well, and the funny part about that is you're already a good storyteller, because you're listening to your own story, believing it and living it. And that's exactly what you need to do. It just, pull the blinds back, see what it really is, and then go share the journey.
And then tell me that story. Yeah.
There you go. And now in 5 years of doing this podcast, and I'm a social human in case you can't tell, there's one thing I will tell everyone, every human, no matter who you are, what you've done, where you come from. I don't care if you lived in a box in Siberia, you have a story. You have something worthy to share. Every single human. So if there's any fear piece around that, I know that statement's not going to alleviate all your apprehensions, but it's the truth. So that's a perfect pivot to me, because I think I did have really leaning into public speaking. I coach Trevor, so I'm very comfortable speaking, but more importantly, being responsible for what I have to say, because I've ran many laps in that, literally, metaphorically, as an athlete and as a coach. And I do think it's important to be a leader. When you have something important to share, you share it. That's your responsibility. I've had privilege in my life to compete at high levels, have great coaches, blah, blah, blah. You share it. That's, in my eyes, responsibility. So I did. And then working in the branding world, I think my fear came from, okay, I saw all this inauthenticity, or whatever you label it. And they got over coached, and they got, positioned to be this character versus themselves. And these are not theatrical performances. This is like reality speaking or whatever. And I was like, oh, cool. If I'm going to do public speaking, it might be, or the podcast, it might be raw, it might be messy, but at minimum, it's me. And I want people to know that this is real. They can hate it, but I'd rather them hate me for who I am than love me for what I'm not. So I kind of had this whole story. So I was pumped to do a couple laps and then have you critique my speech. Why don't we talk about some common errors that you see with public speakers, probably people that have some similar story to mine, or whatever the excuse is, what we can do better and why?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what I loved about watching your presentation is you fall into this really great group of individuals who would probably do just fine with no public speaking training moving forward. Like, you would absolutely continue to gain opportunities. You would be able to like continue to, because you're not afraid, right? You walk into the space, there's confidence, there's command. And I love picking apart that person because there is so much upscaling that can be done, even when we find ourselves at a place where we're like, I feel pretty good about my presence on stage. So, and I've got my phone here. So if it looks like I'm looking over, it's because I definitely took notes over your presentation. There are a couple of key areas that I think are really important to point out from your presentation that are applicable to anybody who presents on stage in front of a group of individuals. The very first thing we often think about, and even as we've been talking about it back and forth, we often think about our stage presence from the perspective of our story first.
Hi there. This is Laura Mahoney from Lux Neuro, Neurofeedback and Counseling. We are bringing you stories of transformation each podcast. Imagine how we can transform your life. Long COVID. I had COVID a few years ago. It was the worst, during and especially after. I never fully recovered from COVID until I started neurofeedback. It turns out I had long COVID, which for me meant napping 2 to 4 times a day. It was debilitating, so much so that I lost my life. My relationship suffered, and I even lost the small business that I loved and I owned. I serendipitously found neurofeedback, and it has absolutely transformed my life. After COVID, napping was a part-time job, taking up to 20 hours or more per week of my time. After starting neurofeedback treatments, my fatigue went away, and with it, the napping. I am so happy to say that I am now present in my life and no longer take naps. I love connecting with my family and friends again, and I have time to be with them. I also am now looking for a job, something that I didn't think would ever happen again. Feeling trapped and hopeless in my life has been replaced with a lust for life, and I can't wait to see what my future holds. All thanks to neurofeedback.
What is the story that we want to tell? What I would actually encourage performers to do, and I will use that word performers because what you're doing, you're getting up and you are performing whatever piece of yourself is most necessary in order to have the impact that you want on that day. But what I would like to see performers and public speakers do is not to start with the story, what they want to tell, but the action they want their audience to take. This serves a couple of really foundational goals. The first one is if you do have any fear around public speaking, it takes a lot of that off when you realize that your public performance is not about you. It is about the audience that has come to listen to you. And so it's not about what you have to do. It's about what they have to do. And when you can take that fear off of yourself and put it on your audience, like not in a way where you're going to stand in front of your audience, the first thing you're going to do is say, like, prepare to be afraid, but that you're no longer thinking about it from the perspective of yourself, but rather, what is it that you want your audience to do? So the first thing that I thought as I was watching your presentation is, what do you want me to do as an audience member as a response to this story and information? And it was a question that never answered itself.
Yeah.
And so from a performance perspective, from a public speaking perspective, like, what do I want my audience to do? Do I want them to call a friend who they haven't spoken to in over 10 years? Do I want them to follow me on social media? Do I want them to read my book? Do I want them to, like, what do I want their next step to be? And start there and then work your way backward. Okay, then what does my call to action have to be in order to establish that action? And then how do I set up the moment before my call to action so that it has the energy that it needs? And what stories are going to fit into that? And what information is going to move to that moment where I say, now what I want you to do is this, right?
I love it.
And so thinking about it in a reverse way like that goes a long way in preparing yourself foundationally with a script that really resonates and has that desired impact that you want for your audience. It also gives you a litmus test, right? A lot of people start with story and information because you can't fail. If all I'm going to do is get on stage and share my story, like I can't fail at that. But if I need my audience to get up at the end and give me a standing ovation, like there's an immediate litmus test, and there's the raised stakes of failure. And so raising those stakes, making it more important for yourself so that you have to show up in a very specific way in order to manage that outcome that you desire.
I love that. Even as you're saying that, and I'll post my speech on YouTube, very vulnerably so. And just so people, if they want to listen to this and then look at the critiques that you're saying, because now, even as you're saying, I was very clear that it was a group of women in the steel industry. And so there, a lot of strong women living quite literally in a man's world. So the whole point of the show the conversation was about empowering them and knowing that their worth is there and everything they've already done. So it's so funny. And I knew that, I just never said it. And so I think sometimes we're missing the things that are right in front of us. And that's why feedback and a professional is so critical. Just like in sports, like if you're a good natural athlete, you need the coach to dial in the details, and then you get to the top level. So being good is good, but if you can be great, that's where you can really get directions with little tweaks. And the funny thing is too, when you're saying this, I can see how much simpler I could have made the message and streamlined it and took out some of the middle to make it even more clear. So the clarity comes even as you're running this exercise. So if you've got a speech out there, go watch it, listen to this, and then see where you can even do your details better, and then go call Chris.
Yeah. And really thinking about it from impact. I mean, intention is important, and you'll hear me talking about intentional communication a lot, but our intention falls flat if it doesn't have our intended audience impact. And so thinking about, just importantly, what do I want my audience to do? What do I want them to experience? What do I want that impact to look like? Then you're right. You go back through and you're like, why did I say these 7 things? Because that has nothing to do with the impact that I wanted to create, and so it does allow you to streamline that script.
Amen. And you talked about, I'll let you kind of go what are the other tips you want to leave, but another thing that stood out to me was cadence, because I naturally talk fast, and I always feel like I got to cram a lot into a little, and that's genetics, lifestyle, all the things, nurture and nature. Right. So to calm down and like the cadence, do you have a good exercise? Because you're saying words per minute. This is such new territory to me. How do I know how many words per minute I'm doing? Or is it just a matter of like slowing it down in general?
Okay. So I'm glad you asked that. Right. So what Kristen's talking about in terms of words per minute is most of us speak at about 150 words per minute. That is casual conversation, right? Some a little faster, some a little slower. In the notes that I gave, I wanted her to trim it down to 125 words per minute because it gives you space to make some performative choices. How can you use pause? How can you use changing your pacing or your rhythm? A lot of that dives into power language and superpower language, which I talked a little bit in my notes about. But by slowing it down, you give yourself time to like play between the words, as opposed to just jam packing full of information, which I know why most of us do it. It's because we're trying to legitimize ourselves, right? I have to give them 900 pieces of valuable information. Otherwise I'm discredited. The reality is you're lucky if your audience remembers 3 things. And so be deliberate about what you want those 3 things to be. Do more with less, as opposed to scattering yourself so thin. Now, to answer your question, how do I know what 125 words is? I've been doing this long enough that I sit at about 125 words per minute when I present. But what I would recommend you do is get yourself a teleprompter. I've got an app for my phone. It was a real cheap one. It was like $5. Grab about 500 words of text, put it into that teleprompter, and change the speed until it takes, what would that be, 4 minutes? Yeah, until it takes 4 minutes. And then practice reading at that speed, just to get a feeling for what it is. You're going to notice it's going to be painfully slow. But what it allows for is the opportunity to go, well, I've got all this time, so why don't I play with this word? Or I've got a lot of power language in this statement right here, so maybe I should slow that down so that my audience has the time that they need to unpackage that information. This doesn't really resonate with us, but if you have an accent right? Your audience needs time to tune their ear to that accent. And so slowing down even more in the first couple of minutes can be really beneficial for making sure that your audience is staying with you throughout the duration of that presentation. So there's a lot of reasons why being intentional, not just about what's going into the script, but about the time that you're taking with the script and how you're playing with the script and utilizing the script to your intentions. There's a lot of power behind that.
I love that. And are most of your speeches at this point, do you memorize them? Are you going off a script? Like, how do you approach most of your speaking opportunities?
So I'm 100% script-based.
Okay.
I do encourage my clients to be script-based. I have a lot of reasons for that. Why leave anything to chance? And the more solidified your script is, in my mind, the less you're leaving to chance. There are plenty of reasons why people are apprehensive towards scripts, memorization being one of those things. I have a lot of tools that I utilize with individuals to help them memorize text. But the other one is a lot of people feel scripted when they go off a script. It's kind of like when you're reading a book out loud and you're like, this doesn't sound like me, or it doesn't feel like me. That's a place that you can get to. Like when I get on stage, I would say most of my audience does not realize that I have memorized my script, because I've gotten to a place where I can create what's called the illusion of the first time, where I've essentially rehearsed it so much that it feels like I'm just sharing it impromptu with individuals, for the very first time. What I will say about a script is whether you decide to go with a script or not, you do have to be aware that you're still working off of a script, right? The reason why I think scripts are so efficacious is because they give us the opportunity to be intentional about the language we want to use, not the reactive language that we have been using our entire life. And so if you're going into a presentation and you're not scripted and you're not intentional about the language that you're using language, you're using words, you're using a cadence, you're using examples from your past that exist as your foundational script that may or may not still be supporting your current needs. So whether you're working off of a script or you're not working off of a script, you're still working off of a script. Yeah. And I just want people to be really aware, is this script, is it benefiting me? Is it creating the kind of relationships that I want? Has it worked in the past in terms of the influence that I'm creating? Do I know how to sell from stage? Do I know how to ask an audience to do something? Or do I retreat at that final moment because I'm terrified of making them uncomfortable, right? So giving yourself permission to be curious and aware around those, just so you know, what is the script that I'm working off of, whether I've written it for this presentation or I'm pulling from old scripts past.
Do you help people write the actual script, or they come equipped with it and then you just help them execute in the actual delivery?
So I will absolutely help people write scripts. I love to write. I'm a wordsmith. There's a lot of individuals who don't enjoy that, or they just, the same thing as we need an objective eye as a stage director. Sometimes we just need an objective editor to come in and go, I don't understand what you're trying to say here, or tightening up that language, or, pulling out things that are kind of superfluous, So I'll absolutely work with a client through that process, because I know there could be a lot of vulnerability around script building. I also know it can be a daunting task.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just not someone that, again, coming from such athletic background and just conditioned accordingly, you show up, you play. Yes, you have your plays, you have your intentions. The reality is there's so much gray area, and the ball could drop, the weather could be different, what have you. So that's kind of my comfort zone. How do you feel about just a PowerPoint with, major hits, and then you just kind of go of the guidelines of the PowerPoint points, like the main phrases on the PowerPoint?
Sure. And if you want to use that PowerPoint, and I think one of the things we talked about with your PowerPoint is I thought it was more extensive than I wanted it to be. Yeah. My thought about a PowerPoint is if the messaging's on the PowerPoint, then what do I need you for? Yeah. Right. And so finding a way to bring those two things together so that you're the main attraction and the PowerPoint is supporting that main attraction. That being said, I know a lot of people, and I know I've done this in the past too, in the past as well. I lecture taught at the university for 6 years. So I did the same lecture over and over and over again. And it got to the point where I could walk into the class, pull up my PowerPoint, and it was like, it's like riding a bike. You're like, oh yeah, I remember this conversation. I remember the jokes that I used. I remember how this goes. But again, I am working off of a script because I'm working off of the foundational information that I've created around this topic. Just like when you're on the field, you're working off of a script that is the way that you were taught to play, the plays that you have. Maybe it's people that you trust most on the team. So it's like, who do you turn to first, right? If you've got a pass or you've got to make a play, right? You're still working off of a script that's been built and fortified through the time that you've played as an athlete. And so you are living in that gray area, and it's giving you the space to be improvisational, but the script is absolutely there. And so a lot of it depends too, to your point, is this a presentation that you're doing for the first time that's out of your comfort zone? That might require more scripting. Yeah. Or is this a conversation that you've had 1,000 times, you could have in your sleep, and what you really need to do is just reconfigure some pieces of it, making sure you have a strong action ask, making sure you're intentional about your language, making sure, you know what your pacing looks like. But, so I don't say no to the person who just wants to, quote unquote, wing it, as long as you understand you're not winging anything. Yeah. You're absolutely being supported by the intentions and the scripting that you've created in the past.
There you go. Yeah, there was it. And again, if you are naturally good, like if you're a good athlete, you step on the field, you kind of get it. And then when you start to ask questions or you get around a higher level team, you get a coach, you can see where the intricacies make such a difference. And again, this is a tool that you can use for your profession, your public speaking, something you got to do for work, in addition to your everyday life. So these skills really are life skills that carry on through so many things. And if you could streamline a conversation with your significant other in some capacity where they understand quicker, that's probably the best money you've ever spent on anything. And then you can go monetize it at work and whatever else.
Yeah. Or imagine those daunting first dates that I'm so happy that I haven't had to be on one, especially in an age of online dating, never had to do that. So glad I didn't. And it's a performance.
Yeah.
And being intentional about the way you show up and the type of people that you want to attract. These choices are performative, and they require some thought. They require an experience that you want to create. They require understanding intention and impact and bridging those together by going, okay, how do I need to show up in order to make sure that those 2 points are aligned?
Amen. Yeah, the dating thing is so funny because it's not good for life, but it's great for podcasting. Come through and tell all your stories because there's some really funny miscommunications and misunderstanding, all the things. So, if nothing else, it's good comedy. But yeah, that's great. Is there anything else you want to share that's maybe someone that's really good at public speaking looking to get better, or someone brand new looking to get into the game, or they think there might be legs in this?
Yeah. I'm looking through the other things. And I've got 6 of them, so you're making me pick here.
Let's go.
Okay.
You can share a couple, whatever stands out.
Okay. So let's do this one first because I think it's the most important.
Okay.
And then if we have time, there's another one. One of the things that I see too often in presentations, and it comes up in a lot of different ways, but it's a person apologizing for their presentation. Right. And the really obvious one is, the guy gets up in front of you and it's, hey guys, unfortunately, Ted can't be here today. So you're stuck with me. And I know what we're doing, right? It's a little self-deprecating humor. It's to ease tensions. But by coming out at the beginning and saying, I'm only going to be this good, it makes it that much harder for you to be here. Right. Yeah. Everybody will acknowledge that you weren't this good. You were this good. Right. But by apologizing on the front end, you make it that much more difficult for your presentation to have the electricity and the impact that is necessary to really mobilize change. Where I saw it with you, it was a little more subversive. One of the things that you had said was, hey, I'm just going to speak through this really quickly because I want to get on to.
Okay.
And that is an apology in a different form, where essentially what you're saying is, this piece of information isn't that important, so I'm going to breeze through it and get on to the really meaty stuff. And, my pushback on that would be, if it's not important, don't say it. If it is important, utilize it and don't apologize for it. So I see apologizing happening all over presentations and public speaking. If you can pull all of those needs, and I found myself doing it, and sometimes even recently, we fall on it so easily. But if you cannot apologize for your presentation, you give yourself that much more space to be amazing.
I love that. I didn't realize that at all, and that totally hits when you explain it that way.
Mhm.
And it's a really good metaphor for life, I think, where it's like, oh, let's just breathe through this warm up and then let's get to the game. Well, you really need the warm up for the
Yeah.
game, and you need all these other pieces. So I had no idea. So thank you for pointing. I mean, obviously saw your very in-depth notes, which were incredible.
Right.
And I'm going to continue. I've shared them with a friend. Like I said, she's actually going to use some of the notes for me for herself. But these are things like you wouldn't even think of, but then when you explain it, it totally makes sense. And that's absolutely not the message that I ultimately want to send.
Right. And usually we don't. And it just further highlights how important it is to be intentional, and also remembering that we're operating off of a script, right? And somewhere in that script, you internalize this idea that I need to speed through. And from a very practical perspective, you do speed through less important information. You just don't tell your audience that you do it,
Okay.
right? It's so there are practical reasons behind it. And sometimes in that moment when we haven't scripted a certain part, or we're working off of old tapes and old scripts, that moment might come up where we're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to tell them exactly what I'm doing right now, So
Yeah.
it's just something to think about, that when you apologize for your presentation, you make it that much more challenging for your audience to accept it at its full weight and magnitude.
I love that. Yes, I do remember I cited Brene Brown, and I was like, well, we're the version of, I don't think I said below, but something other than her. And even when I was saying the speech, I'm like, oh, that's not really what I mean. So
Yeah.
there was little things that I caught. Being a competitor, you're not going to walk out there and be like, well, I'm going to come in second today. So it's
Right.
always, it's always, and a lot of this, honestly, I think is just like sports. It's practice. Like you need to
Yes.
show up and run the laps and do
Mhm.
the things so you can be game ready. But that takes a lot of hours outside of the field, in the
Right.
training room, getting coaching and understanding what's really going on.
Well, and that's one of the things that I'm excited about with the book too, is the book has a lot of practical application to it for that space, because we don't have a lot of space to practice our communication.
Right.
We either have to be on and communicating effectively, or we're hiding by ourselves. But going out and seeking out safe spaces or easy spaces where we can practice some of these challenging communicative elements, that can be really difficult. And so having people that you trust, whether it's friends or family or colleagues at work, that you can just kind of play with some of these techniques. That you're not, a particularly curious or interested person, because people weren't very interested in you growing up. So it's like, why don't I practice when I'm at the grocery store? Why don't I ask the cashier one more question than what I would normally be comfortable with, even if that means it's only one question, but making sure that you're taking the opportunity in your interpersonal and your public speaking life to practice these ideas.
I love that. And it facilitates an awareness. So you can be more present and more in your shoes in the moment. I think that practice of awareness is massive for everything you're doing, but it really heightens what you're doing, what's coming out of your mouth. And while making you a better public speaker or communicator, it puts you more in your body, and you're just more aware. Do you practice that, like being present? Or I'm sure staging and theater and everything, that's all part of the puzzle. Do you practice that with your speakers?
I do. Okay. Being aware and being in the moment, which is, I don't know if it's a skill that we've lost or it's a skill that we've never had.
Yeah.
Again, I feel so spoiled spending as much time as I did in the theatrical community, because those individuals are so present and in themselves, especially when they're on stage. But most of us aren't. Most of us we're in 37 places at once. And it's really hard. I even think about this when I'm playing with my 3-year-old at home, and, he and I will be playing, and all of a sudden I realize that I'm in my head and I'm not connected with him. And so I need to pull myself out of that, usually by asking him a question. What are you doing? How can I help? But engaging through communication to pull myself out of myself and get myself back into the moment with him or with my wife, or, whoever, sometimes with a client, whatever the case may be. But just like making sure that we're there and we're aware and we're living in the moment.
Yeah. And that goes right back to mental health and community, getting your feet on the ground and seeing really what's going on. So even more practical life skills. I will put up my speech so you can see what we're critiquing. This was a first time run on the speech that I gave, and I'm very big into like energy and trust. And I don't say I show up to fail, but I'm very okay being like, here's what I did. I just competed. All right, let's watch the game tape. Let's pick it apart. Like I'm comfortable in that space. It's very much my athletic life. So this was the first time I did it. I'm very intentional about the message. It downloaded. I wrote it in about 15 minutes. It was very clear. It came from a lifetime of experience, but it's important enough for me to want to get it better because I think the message is important. And so I know my vehicle or means and intentionality of communicating that message is as important as the message itself. So I'm inspired to really dial that in. Was there anything else around that piece that you wanted to use as an example to level up our listeners here?
So the only thing I'm going to say, right, because you used a little profanity, and I just want to tell people that I am all for the PG-13 speaker. Okay, I'm a little more turned off by the rated R. Like if you've got more F-bombs than Boondock Saints, like I'm tired of listening to you. But I do push back on the public speaking coaches who say you should just leave it out of your presentation completely, because that is powerful language that can be used powerfully, right? I think it needs to be intentional. There needs to be some weight around it. But if you see yourself as a PG-13 speaker, if you want to be a little off color like that, like lean into it and use it to your advantage. Because I do think it can turn heads. It can bring audiences back to attention. I just think there's a lot that can be used from that language subset that we're missing out on if we just decide, I'm going to be a clean rated G speaker.
Yeah. Well, and if people know how you speak on the regular, maybe your audience doesn't know you, that's fine. But a lot of people have a lot of intel with your phone. So again, I think it kind of leans into that authenticity piece, air quotes, if you're listening to this. If that's how you speak, say it. I don't even remember what I said. You had said, I think I said shit or something. I didn't remember in the speech. Yeah. So I didn't even notice.
Well, and that was what I noticed, is that you didn't notice.
Okay.
Right. And so again, it's like, I just want you to use it intentionally. I want you to use it for the reason of an impact, because it can be so jarring and it has so much power that when it's sort of used haphazardly, it's like, I as an audience member felt like we missed a moment. Okay. I was like, ooh, that could have been like a really beautiful moment where we bring everybody's attention back together just by using one dynamic word.
I love that. And this is the little, the nuances that are big, like the little things that make it really big. So there's so much intel. I think this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time to take my work and address it. And because it's so good to say what you do, but to actually see you in action and pick some things apart and coach and direct, I think that's magical. And we are very much an experiential generation. I want to say at this point in the world, it's like, okay, what do you do? All right, show us. So that was a really cool exercise that we got to do. I appreciate that. You taking the time to do that. Tell us where we find you when the book's coming out. I know you said the date, but any Amazon links or anything, any direction you want to give us here, hit us with it.
Yep. No Amazon links yet. It is set to come out November the 17th. That's a Sunday. For more information on that, follow me on Instagram at Chris Speaks Up, or go to my website, speakintoactioncom.com. Or you can email me at chris.speakintoaction@gmail.com. And I will respond in any of those ways.
Let's go. And final question for you. Well, I'll say this first. Is there anything else you want to share, or tips or anything I didn't ask you that's like a key piece of this community?
No. And in fact, I want to give you permission, if you'd like, to make those notes available to the public as part of what they're watching.
I absolutely will.
Yeah. Because I like most of us, I'm more intentional in writing. And so if there was anything that was like, what the heck was he talking about during that presentation? Like, go in and read those notes, because I'm pretty intentional about the way that I present them to you.
You are. I was very impressed. It was like paragraphs of direction. I'm like, dang, this human really watched game tape and broke down the play-by-play. So I'm like, this is extraordinarily helpful. Like I said, I'm sharing my notes with a friend for her speech. So it's very impactful. I'll load the video on YouTube, and then I'll put all the notes in the comments so people can tell. So check us out. Turmeric Tequila, you know where to find us. Our final question then will be, what is success to you?
What is success to me? Wow. That's a great question. I think for me, success is just, I don't know. And I'm certain that the audience has felt this. I'm so passionate about what I do.
Yeah.
Where I feel like I failed is when that passion doesn't translate to other people. Is that when I get so riled up about this work, and I watch public speakers and I'm like, you missed this, or I watch, interpersonal communication or my own interpersonal communication, and I'm like, what happened? But when my enthusiasm doesn't infect other people, that feels a little like failure to me. And it brings me back to that idea, because then I feel like I'm being misunderstood. So for me, success is like that alignment, is how I'm speaking up in the world. Is that resonating with other people? Am I creating influence? Am I creating an impact in my community? That's how I know when I'm being successul.
Amen. I completely agree. The passion really is the pulse. I'm like you, or if I'm in, it could be the worst day or the last meeting of the day. And if we're firing and it resonates, everything just kicks up a notch. And what a beautiful place to exist. Where you just feel alive, you feel present, you feel there. And then you get to have this energy exchange with a like-minded human and you have positive impact. That's great. Even if it's just for entertainment, you positively exchange energy and passion.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's what's more exciting than an electric conversation like that, where you look up and it's 2.5 hours later and you're like, how did I get here? That's what that's what I feel like we're missing so often are those opportunities to get lost in another person.
Totally. Sometimes the answer to that question is tequila, but that's a different podcast. So we'll save it. But hey, you got to have both. It can't be all business all the time. Sometimes people like us need to chill out and not do business all the time and just breathe. So it's a balance of both. But I love your energy. I think the public speaking thing is going to be phenomenal for coaching and humans. But the area we're entering, election year, there's so much heightened energy, and communication and connection are going to be such a major piece of our mental health and ways that we move forward, and our young humans getting off the cell phone. I see it every single day. It's not because of our older people's get off the phones or tell free, blah, blah, blah. Our young people get it. So I think you are going to have space to connect, particularly with our young people, nothing to do with business. I'm just putting this into universe where it's just them wanting to communicate with another human. And I can see you doing lectures and master classes on get to know your friends, even simpler stuff. So we'll see, but I love what you're doing. I love your heart behind it. And I'm excited to see how this grows.
Well, thank you, KO.
Yes. We'll see you soon. Chris, keep us posted on all things and check out all the links and everything else. As this podcast comes out, I'll put the speaking video up, and then all Chris's stuff will be there as well. So come follow the train.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining Turmeric and Tequila with your host, Kristen Olson. Tune in next time, and don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.